You've seen the clips, you've heard the rumors, but almost nobody is talking about the most painful part of the Whittakers' story. Why 3 vulnerable adults, Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray, were taken from the only home they've ever known and placed under state care. Tonight, we're not here to mock or sensationalize. We're here to walk through 7 documented, verifiable reasons the state stepped in, and why, as hard as it is to hear, they are safer where they are now. And that final reason may completely change how you see this family. We'll roll straight from this into a calm, here's what actually happened segment. The day everything changed. On a quiet day in September 2025, 3 of the most vulnerable members of the Whittaker family were taken from the only home they had ever known. Ray, about 72, his sister Lorraine, 79, and her son Timmy, 46, were placed into protective custody by Adult Protective Services in West Virginia. Betty, 73, who had helped raise them for decades, and their brother Larry, 69, were left standing in the yard, stunned. All they were reportedly told was that they couldn't live here no more. For the outside world, it was another headline in a story that had already gone viral. For this family in Odd, West Virginia, it was a fracture that may never fully heal. Overnight, the routines that had defined their lives, the familiar couch, the yard, the faces they woke up to every morning, were replaced by strangers, paperwork, and locked doors. Betty has said she doesn't know where they were taken. What she does know is that the house that once held 5 people now feels unbearably empty. And yet, behind this painful separation were years of growing concern. Reports of squalid conditions, dangerous visitors, and questions about whether anyone in that decaying home could truly keep Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy safe. That was the day love and history were no longer enough. Reason 1. Documented abuse and violence in the home. Before the state ever showed up at the Whittaker home, there were already warning signs that something was terribly wrong. In mid-2025, Betty went to court and requested an emergency protective order after saying a family acquaintance had attacked her and the others. For a moment, it looked like the system was finally going to put a legal barrier between the most vulnerable Whittakers and the people hurting them. But that barrier never held. The order was later dropped or allowed to expire, and the same individuals, a relative known as BJ and BJ's boyfriend, were allowed back around the family. In on-camera accounts and community reports, relatives described Timmy being beaten in a ditch by BJ's boyfriend. These weren't internet rumors. They were specific incidents repeated by people who know the family and live in their world. For Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy, who cannot fully understand danger or defend themselves, this meant waking up each day in a house where someone who had already hurt them could walk back through the door. Betty and Larry were their guardians, the adults the state expected to keep them safe. By letting known aggressors remain close, by not maintaining the protective order, the people in charge of protecting them unintentionally left them exposed. When Adult Protective Services finally intervened, they did so for protection from exactly this kind of ongoing documented abuse. In state care, BJ, her boyfriend, and anyone with a history of violence can no longer just appear in their living room. For the first time, there are locked doors, visitor checks, and a system designed to keep the people who hurt them on the outside. Reason 2. Escape from squalid and unsafe living conditions. Long before the state ever showed up at the Whittaker home, the house itself was sending out warning signs. Reporters and visitors described it as a decaying property sunk deep in poverty, a place where the walls, the floors, and even the air seemed tired. One elderly family member was filmed sitting in an extremely cluttered, unsanitary kitchen, surrounded by the kind of mess that doesn't happen overnight, but builds up over years. After a fire destroyed their mobile home, things only got worse. The family ended up in a structure with no consistent running water, a worn-out outhouse instead of an indoor bathroom, and far too many people living in a space that was never meant to hold them all. Outside, trash scattered the yard. A broken chicken coop leaned in the background. Inside, food sat abandoned on a gas stove while flies crawled across the counters. Even the wall calendar, stuck on a month-long gone, felt like a symbol of how time had stopped for that house. For most adults, this kind of environment would be hard enough. For Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy, elderly, disabled, and unable to fully understand or fix any of it, it was dangerous. They couldn't reliably clean, manage plumbing issues, or protect themselves from the health risks that come with filth, extreme temperatures, and structural neglect. Reason 3. Disabilities that require professional 24/7 care. Behind every viral clip of the Whittakers, there is a reality most people never truly see. Just how disabled and how dependent some members of this family really are. Ray is an elderly man who rarely uses words at all, communicating more through sounds and expressions than sentences. Timmy, though in his 40s, moves and reacts with the innocence of a young child, easily confused, easily frightened, and completely reliant on others to guide him. Lorraine, well into her late 70s, struggles with her own limitations while still trying to function as a caregiver. In that crumbling house, none of them had the kind of structured, professional support their conditions demanded. There was no full-time nurse watching for infections, no therapist tracking changes in behavior, no trained aide making sure medication was taken correctly and safely. Hygiene depended on whether overwhelmed relatives could keep up. Medical care depended on whether someone noticed a problem early enough to act. If pain went unnoticed, if a symptom was dismissed, there was no safety net behind them. State care doesn't erase their disabilities, but it finally matches their needs with real resources. Now, their daily lives are overseen by people whose entire job is to monitor vulnerable adults, checking skin for sores, watching how they walk, making sure they eat, bathe, and sleep in clean conditions. If something changes, it must be documented. If something looks wrong, it must be reported. For people who can't clearly say "help me," having trained eyes on them at all hours can mean the difference between hidden suffering and real, timely care. Reason 4. Overwhelmed elderly caregivers and failure to protect. For decades, Betty and Larry were the ones holding the Whittaker family together. Betty is in her 70s, Larry not far behind, and they have spent most of their adult lives surrounded by relatives who could not fully care for themselves. Whatever their mistakes, it's clear they were never strangers who walked away. They stayed in that house long after most people would have given up. But love does not erase age. In recent years, Betty's own health has declined. She has spoken about her medical problems, her exhaustion, and the weight she carries just getting through a normal day. Larry, too, shows the strain of years of hard living, limited income, and the constant pressure of being the man of the house in a place that is literally falling apart around him. Now picture what that means in reality. Two aging, tired people trying to watch over three vulnerable adults who need help with almost everything. Cooking, cleaning, bathing, medical appointments, dealing with visitors, handling money, navigating social workers and police. It all lands on the same two sets of shoulders. Any mistake, any moment of looking the other way, has consequences for people who can't protect themselves. When authorities looked at this picture, they didn't just see a family. They saw two elderly caregivers who were overwhelmed, outnumbered, and living in conditions that no longer met basic safety standards. In the language of social services, that isn't just struggling. It starts to look like a failure to protect, even if the people failing never meant to cause harm. Reason 5. Viral fame, trespassers, and public harassment. When the Whittakers first appeared online, most viewers saw a shocking, unusual family in the hills of West Virginia. What many didn't think about was what would happen after the cameras left. The videos didn't just stay on YouTube, they spread across social media, turning the family's address into something close to a tourist attraction. People who had never met them suddenly knew where they lived, what their yard looked like, even which window to point a camera at. Soon, it wasn't just documentary crews arriving with permission. Strangers began showing up uninvited, walking onto the property, filming from the road, and trying to get their own content with the Whittakers in the background. Some knocked on the door, some shouted from cars, some simply stood and stared. For people like Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy, who struggle to understand even ordinary social situations, this constant stream of unknown faces was confusing at best, frightening at worst. Inside the house, Betty and Larry had almost no way to control it. They could ask people to leave, but they couldn't patrol the road, filter the motives of every visitor, or protect their relatives from being laughed at, recorded without consent, or manipulated on camera. What looked like fame from the outside felt a lot more like harassment on the inside. In state care, that changes. Addresses are confidential. Visitors are screened. Reason 6. Stopping financial scams and misuse of donations. By the time the state stepped in, the Whittaker name had already pulled in a staggering amount of money. Between GoFundMe campaigns and direct donations, public records and video documentation show that well over $100,000 was raised with the promise of fixing the house, improving care, and giving Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy a safer life. Yet even after all that, visitors still found the same squalor. Broken structures, an outhouse, clutter, and almost no visible change in the trio's day-to-day reality. Betty and Larry reportedly could not clearly explain where much of that money went when asked. Worse, the family story became a magnet for outright fraud. West Virginia State Police launched a criminal investigation into people who claimed to be helping the Whittakers, while allegedly diverting donations into their own pockets. According to an official report, 2 men who presented themselves as friends or managers of the family used YouTube, Facebook, and other platforms to collect money on behalf of the Whittaker family, while only a fraction ever reached Ray, Timmy, or Lorraine. In some periods, one report suggests the family saw roughly a third of what was raised in their name, the rest siphoned off as profit. All of this unfolded on Betty and Larry's watch, not necessarily because they were masterminding it, but because they couldn't control or properly oversee the people and money swirling around their home. In state care, that chaos stops. Any benefits or legitimate donations meant for the 3 are now handled through regulated channels, audited accounts, and institutional safeguards. Instead of being a brand others can cash in on, Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray finally become what they always should have been in the eyes of the system: protected individuals whose money is legally required to serve their needs, not someone else's gain. Reason 7. A lifetime without a voice and new accountability. For most of their lives, Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray have been almost completely voiceless. Ray rarely speaks in full words. Timmy answers in short, simple phrases. Lorraine struggles with age and disability of her own. None of them can easily sit down with a lawyer, a judge, or a social worker and explain, in clear detail, what has happened to them or what they need. That silence is what allowed so much to continue for so long. If they were cold, hungry, or afraid, they couldn't call 911. If someone hit them, they couldn't write out a statement. If money raised in their name disappeared, they couldn't demand to see receipts. Year after year, their safety depended entirely on whether the people around them chose to tell the truth, ask for help, or admit they were in over their heads. Too often, that didn't happen. In state care, their silence no longer means invisibility. Nurses, aides, and social workers are mandated reporters, legally required to speak up if they see bruises, neglect, or anything that looks wrong. Every medication, every appointment, every incident has to be documented. Decisions about where they live and how they are treated must be explained to a court, not just quietly decided in a kitchen. For the first time, the law itself is forced to act as their voice. After a lifetime of having almost no say in what happened to them, there is finally a system that has to listen on their behalf. Accepting that Timmy, Lorraine, and Ray are safer in state care doesn't mean celebrating their separation. It means finally putting their protection above our curiosity. It means no more driving out to their road for selfies, no more turning rumors into content, no more ignoring the systems that failed them for decades.